we know that white supremacy, when we talk about white supremacy, it's about systems and policies. It's not white people. Hello, I am Rita Suh, and I am the co-director of the Culture and Equity Project at UCLA Center X. And I am a 1.5 generation Korean American, and my parents immigrated here from Seoul, Korea in the 70s when pretty much the borders were opened up for East Asians to come back to the United States. And born and raised in California, my parents, my grandparents, aunts and uncles, everybody had and still have businesses here in Los Angeles. You know, you and I connected because I talked about how my grandparents owned a liquor store, several liquor stores before and then after the LA riots happened in South Central. And so I'm very aware of the historical and sociopolitical issues that surround the Black and specifically Korean communities, but yeah, Black and Asian communities. And I am so aware of how it is really perpetuated by white supremacy. And we know that white supremacy, when we talk about white supremacy, it's about systems and policies. It's not white people, right? And I think that's something that a lot of people need to understand, that there's a difference.
And we know that systems and procedures and policies can be picked up by different individuals, regardless of skin color, but it still has a mission to promote kind of white supremacy at the expense of Black people, or at the expense of really solidarity of people of color throughout the board. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's why I want to do this interview with you specifically.
Well, really, ultimately, people buy into that white supremacy gaze because they are aware of this racial triangulation. You know, it's a myth, though we know that it's a myth, but there are people who subscribe to this racial idea that white is at the top and Black is at the bottom. So the closer you can get to white, depending on how you present yourself, the language that you speak or you choose not to speak, who you surround yourself with, what policies you decide that benefit you, and all of that really is subscribing to that white supremacy. And so,
man, anybody can be an agent of white supremacy, especially when you can recognize how we all are seduced and or incentivized to pick up different standards, modes, methods, procedures, ethics, morals that's really conducive to, you feel me, white supremacy. Or, you know what I'm saying? I feel like I'm gonna be sitting in there somewhere more around anti-Blackness and how different people are incentivized to pick up anti-Blackness, and how Black people are incentivized to pick up white supremacy in order to distance themselves from Blackness and or trying to deal with anti-Blackness. And I think that was the part that I think that I just learned, that during 1992, before, I guess, the LA race riots, we know that Black people were originally protesting in white communities. And that police officers, or, you know what I mean? Yeah, I'm gonna say police officers, you know, law enforcement had the ability to kind of corral the Black people in the white community and basically send them to the Korean community. This was 1992. And I feel like that's where your insight and your particular personal experiences, you know what I'm saying, kind of come in.
Yeah, I think also, if you don't mind me going backwards, when you're talking about anti-Blackness, it is always about anti-Blackness, because even with the civil riots, a lot, and we talked about this before, a lot of people don't know that before the civil riots civil rights started, not civil rights, but civil rights started.
Yeah, civil rights, yeah.
Asians were not treated equally at all. They were not allowed to buy property. They were not allowed to vote. They were also hanged. They were also told to work for free or by, you know, like very small percentage of whatever white people got paid. So, and then when Black and brown folks started to make a noise and say, hey, we deserve better, we want a space, then that's when a journalist decided, let's pit our Asians against our Black and brown communities. And then Asians were now considered the model minorities. And so then from there on, Asians started to benefit from that. So my story, and I know this particularly from listening to my family members, is when they came here from Korea in the 70s, you know, they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have equity, but they all opened up businesses eventually, right? I mean, and, you know, they all started off working, you know, like my dad, for example, worked in a GMC factory when he first came, but eventually we opened up a liquor store. My grandparents opened up liquor stores. So the question for me was how did you get a business loan when you had no equity and you didn't have a lot of money? When I asked my mom a few years ago, and I really didn't even think about asking her, and she said, well, we just said that we would pay it back, and the banks trusted us because they know that we work harder. And to me, I thought, okay, so that is the white supremacy, right? The fact that these people who came here from another country, who don't have a lot of history, don't have a lot of equity in this land, you gave them money on the promise that they would pay it back. That's really essentially what it is. Of course, they had to sign a loan contract, but let's just say it is a promise. That's what it is.
I mean, I think that gets into one of the analysis that I'm making in terms of thinking about how bootstrap mentality is usually weaponized against Black people, particularly when we're talking about people of color dialogue. Hey man, my family's only been here for 3 generations. Your family's been here for 10 generations. To me, it seems like y'all are lazy and you're not taking advantage of your resources. And this is the reason why you and your people are behind. Because me and my people, you think about it, the 70s, hey, I just moved back to Bryan College. I just moved back to Houston. That's close to Bryan College in Texas, where I'm born and raised. My people were enslaved individuals, like literally in my hometown. You feel what I'm saying? So think about it, in terms of what we would call it, upward mobility, Recognize that it's not the same for everybody. So really, when you ask your mother about how she was able to get the loans without kind of like how they was able to get loans without any assets, and then he was able to kind of just propose to Black people, kind of what was that conversation like?
So she had no idea. This was, we really spent a lot of time in the pandemic just sitting and listening. I started asking her like over childhood. I started recording it because I realized, there's not that much time left and I want to have these stories. So I'm telling you, from the pandemic, she just recently learned that not everybody had the same opportunities.
Yes.
And so when I told her, I said, did you know that Black and brown people here in America who've been here for generations were not offered the same opportunities? And she said, really? Why? And I said, yeah. So let's talk about that, right? When we say things like, if Asians can make it, why can't Blacks? It really undermines the racism and the oppression that Black Americans have been dealing with. But someone who's an immigrant from another country, my mom was never taught that in Korea. She didn't learn about US history in Korea, right? So it's not something that she knew. And then of course, when she's here, she's just working and trying to survive. So it's not like she took a history class. But it was interesting that she had no idea. So I said, yeah, because even within our family, within our community, people still subscribe to this idea of if you just worked harder, then you could get more.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, oh, I had no idea. She was, I wouldn't say blown away, but I know she started thinking like, okay, this really challenges a lot of notions that I had about the community. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's something that started to be uncovered for me when I started to get into more about productivity and get more into like classism and kind of how we chastise poor people. I started thinking about it. What does it mean for a group of people that historically been here working for free most of the part, be characterized as being lazy? You see what I'm saying? Thinking about the ideas like, hey, if you just worked hard, you'll get further. It's like, hey, we've been working hard since we've been.
Oh yeah, meritocracy is a myth. There's no such thing. And we know, because I know you talk about this a lot on your platform, people with disabilities are categorized as lazy.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of times people aren't even diagnosed until way later in life, until they've already internalized the narrative that, oh, I must be lazy, I am dumb.
Yeah. Hey, I just got diagnosed in November with ADHD. So I've definitely been working through a lot of the internalized insecurities and all that, you know what I mean? So I think that when we think about the intersections of like ableism and racism and classism, I think we start to get into a lot of, just complexities with how we relate to each other, with how structures, keep certain people in and keep certain people out. From your perspective and your expertise, what would be some ways that we could build solidarity specifically with like, you know, the African American community and the Asian community, but more specifically like the African American community and like the Korean community, given what we're talking about right now?
I'm so glad you asked that, because that's a question that we speak a lot within this forum. When I say forum, I mean in the education forum, right? Yeah. And number one, I think the conversation needs to happen not just at this level. We keep talking about racism and structures and inequities at our, you know, within our platforms and our spaces. And so I think it's important that we talk about it with our families, within our communities. We have to challenge these norms. And I think a lot of it too is understanding cultural behaviors. And I'll just give you one quick example. I know that for example, in the liquor store, one of the big issues that comes up a lot is how money is exchanged. So in the Black community, I know Black customers take offense to the fact that Asian, you know, owners will just put the money on the what do you call it?
On the counter. Yep.
Thank you, counter. Yeah. On the counter, right? And so because there's a lot of history about you know, whites not wanting to touch Blacks because there's this inherent like history of dirty and all that.
Dirtiness, filthiness, yeah.
Yes, exactly. But in the Korean community, it's disrespectful to exchange money from hand to hand. Like it's not good luck. So, you know, that is a sign of respect to put it on the counter. And that happens all the time in for example, in Korea, but here it's misunderstood. Even the way that we engage, the way that our language is, the overlapping, the volume, the tone, all of that, I think is such a beautiful part of both cultures, but are also very misunderstood as one misunderstands the other as being disrespectful or combative or whatever, you know, fill in the blank with whatever term you want to use. So I think it's the awareness and having discussions of cultural norms and behaviors so that we understand that, you know, we don't victimize ourselves into saying, well, they were rude to me. It's not rude, it's just cultural. The third thing, and this came from my mom, is, you know, Asians need to go into politics more, because when we continue to have certain groups of people in politics and making policies, then not all views are not all views are represented. And when it comes to Asians, though, we need to be aware, though, that Asians continue to benefit from white supremacy. So still the awareness, and then it needs to start from education too, from kindergarten. Let's talk about systemic racism. Let's talk about how certain groups benefit. And it doesn't have to be about race. It can be about disabilities. It can be about gender and sexual orientation, which I know those two are really hot topics right now, but you know, it needs to be talked about. And it can be done in age-appropriate ways.